So let's do an inventory, because you said 2 or 3 very provocative things. So the first thing, you said, although it was communism, etc., etc., in terms of culture, you said it was an attempt to aestheticize the situation, but nonetheless the end result was that people were very cultured. My own personal experience, I remember I went to teach in Eastern Europe in the early 90s, and I wrote back to my colleagues at Harvard and says these were the best students I've ever had anywhere, because they were deeply cultured and very interested in learning. When I go now and teach in Eastern Europe, they like Western Europe. In my discipline in law, they're interested in making money. If I give a course even on human rights, they don't take it. If I give a course on discriminatory tax or international trade, I have 150 students. So it's a complicated statement you're making, because on the one hand it's a critique, on the other hand it's a lament. We've lost something. And then the second provocative statement you made, you said, even though there was a transition from communism to post-communism, in some deep sense nothing changed. And I just want to ask you, can you say 2 or 3 more words about that? When you say, even though it was post-communism, it wasn't a fundamental change. What do you mean by that? Because again, that's a very interesting and provocative statement.
Yeah, this is, but both of them, they are debates, they are huge debates, and with a lot of people that had debated this. And of course, when we had the moment of the fall of the communism had difficulties to be named, because most of them, they had at a certain moment they were named as a revolution, you know. And of course that it's very difficult to have this name for this moment or for this momentum, but we don't have an unanimity. For me, it's clear that it was not a transformation of the regime, so I take very much what François Furet had said about this moment. We don't see a transformation of the regime, because we cannot have a revolution, because it's not a new regime that comes. It's a return to a regime, a political regime that it existed in practice elsewhere and existed even in our country. So we don't have a new regime that came, and this is the reason we don't have.
What do you mean when you say it's not a new regime? Because it's the same people?
Because no, it's the same political regime. It's a political regime that you know, it was established in Western countries. It's not like the French Revolution, who is going to establish another philosophy, political philosophy in practice. In this sense, it's a new regime. As it was the l'ancien régime in France that changed with the revolution. So in this kind of thinking of a revolution that François Furet had, I think that it was not to change.
So I'm the dumb one. So, but at some level it's totally different. If I look at Romanian politics now, you have a new president or prime minister every year. There's contestation, there's opposition and government, and it changes. And it looks as if people are, in some deep sense, enjoying politics because of this. Whereas before you had an authoritarian, dictatorial regime with the same person in power. Another difference is every regime has secret services, but people in Romania do not have the same fear that they had when they were living under Ceausescu. So these seem to me very fundamental, and you have a free press. You don't get chucked in prison if you say the president stinks. I was myself in Romania just a few months ago, and there was street protest, and I was impressed by the restraint of the police. I was impressed by the restraint of the police. So these seem to be pretty fundamental changes. In other words, to say that it remained the same, at some deep level, you mean it remained the same, because at least outwardly, nobody is going to claim that Romanian democracy now is perfect, which democracy is perfect, and we have a problem of corruption. Maybe get to that in a minute. But I need still to understand the sense in which you mean that it remained the same.
Here we have, I think, 2 levels. So we have the theoretical levels, and we have, which is not the political theory level, and we have also the practice level. And I think, you know, that how the history of Marxism started, and Kolakowski had this idea, but it's not a very difficult one. When he started history of Marxism, he said the political philosophy cannot look at a reality. It's different, cannot look so much at the reality. It has to do the history of ideas. So what I said is more in the political philosophical sense, and not, of course, in the reality sense. Because if we look to the experience, of course, there were a lot of progress in human rights. There, as you said, you know, it's a democratic regime. But what we said also is that where the communists came in Romania in 1944, we had only 1,000 communists in Romania. It was a regime that was brought from outside, and we had a kind of starting of democracy. We have a parliamentary regime in Romania during this time. So in this sense, and I think all the most of the Eastern European countries, so in this sense we said that it's a return for us, you know, it's nothing that is new, because we return to what we had said, we just started in the 30s in practical, that we had, and we just lost it because, you know, it was a regime which was imposed from abroad.
So the continuity, you mean, was between the pre-communist and the post-communist?
The continuity was like this. But if you see, I think, you know, that every regime has his lasting, you know, at least in the 90s. And in my view, what happened is that it's the process of democratization of Eastern countries. Here it's a huge discussion. Of course, was done very much by the European Union. And the criteria that you see a lot of progress, and even in the early 90s, we have people saying that if we didn't have Eastern Europe, and now it's another provocative, I think, idea, if we don't have European Union, Eastern Europe will become a kind of Latin America. So we have Brzezinski saying this in 1990. It's clear that only European Union only Europe can make this Eastern Europe not to become Latin America. And we see that, of course, the democratization in Eastern countries were done very much by the Copenhagen criteria, but everything what was imposed. And here it's another huge discussion. But it was was in practice one of the most rapid one in transitional theory. And but still, you know, you see at the lasting end why I speak about the rule of law, because I think that the rule of law, not only in Romania, because I don't make a distinction between Romania and other countries. I don't think that we are an exceptional country in Eastern Europe. I don't make the separation between Bulgaria and Romania, and I don't believe that we have a Central Europa. I think that we have this in culture, but in reality, I think the regime were the same, and I think that the rule of law was very weak, and was very weak in communist Romania as it was in other Eastern Europe. The rule of law was very weak at the end of the communism, and what we said, what we say, and this I understood immediately, is that in the early 90s, where nobody had understood this, that among these criteria, where I have read the Copenhagen criteria in France, I understood that they don't have the rule of law. And because they had only looking at the election, they are looking to minorities much, but they don't look to something which was fundamental, how the justice is functioning and how the rule of law is functioning. And in this sense, I think that the situation in Eastern Europe in general had a little bit, the situation of the judiciary was not enough, and the rule of law in general was not enough taking into account. So in this we see that how it's a continuation. And maybe I have to answer to the first question, that both of them, they are huge. The culture, yeah.
Let's move on a little bit. So I want to ask two things. So before we started, I was speaking to the ambassador, and she told me something that struck me. I never realized that. I reached the age where I don't have to apologize for my ignorance. That's one of the advantages of getting old. So